Yep, that's great. You'll talk and then you'll talk and then you'll leave. I love that. That's great. That's great. Okay. No mic dropping. All right. Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Is the recorder on? Okay. All right. Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Calling to order the meeting of the Assembly Public Health and Safety Committee. It is April 2nd at about 11 o'clock in the morning. If we could start by calling or just going around and making sure we know who's here. Members first. Why don't we start, Mr. Littlefield?
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Okay, and I'm Cameron Perez-Radia. On the phone, looks like Mr. Myers, are you on?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. And that looks like all the members at this point. We will have other people joining us rather soon. I think they're in the room. We have a very full agenda today, and we're going to try to get through it. So just as a reminder, Mr. Rivera, are you on the phone as well?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Going to be driving to City Hall right now.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so just a reminder that if you want to get in the queue, if you're on the phone, send me a text, and we're going to get started. And we're going to start with the Office of Emergency Management. Welcome, and if you introduce yourself for the record, you can start.
Yes, sir. Thank you. My name is Amanda Loach. I am the director at the Anchorage Office of Emergency Management. Today, I would like to give you a report on the work that we've been doing at the Emergency Operations Center for a potential eruption at Mount Spur. Today, I brought with me a geophysicist from the Alaska Volcano Observatory, Mr. Dave Snyder, and he will give you some information related to the science and what is happening there. And then we will follow up with some of the work that we've been doing so that you understand what it is that we're doing at the Emergency Operations Center and some messaging to help us deliver to the community and the stakeholders. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thank you, Amanda. So as you said, I'm a volcanologist with the U.S. Geological Survey at the Alaska Volcano Observatory here in Anchorage. I've been here since 1997. And I just want to say the AVO is a combined federal, state, and university program. I'm part of the federal component with I didn't state my name, Dave Schneider. Sorry, thank you. Got notes from the side. AVO is a combined program. I'm with the federal component, the U.S. Geological Survey. We also are partners with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Geophysical Institute and the State Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys. Okay, so background and status on Mount Spur. Spur has been at an elevated level of unrest since really about a year ago in April of 2024. We're currently at aviation color code yellow and ground alert level of advisory. We've been there since October of 2024. This is all following an increase in earthquake and deformation of the volcano that began around April of 2024. There's been increased heat flow that's caused melting of the crater at the summit of Mount Spur, and it's formed a lake that was first observed during last summer. And when atmospheric conditions are favorable, you can see steaming from the summit. As last Wednesday, a lot of people saw pretty extensive steaming, mainly related to atmospheric conditions. We did quite significantly, we did 3 gas measurement flights that we did in March showed increased gas emissions from the summit crater as well as Crater Peak. And Crater Peak is on the south flank of the volcano, and that's been the source of the eruptions in really the last 5,000 years, and most recently in 1953 and 1992. So taken together, these observations indicate that magma has come into the volcano. And the question right now is whether or not the magma supply is sufficient to make it to the surface and erupt. Our interpretation is that an eruption is likely, but it's not certain. Notably, in 2004 to 2006, Mount Spur had a similar level of unrest, but an eruption did not occur. Signs of unrest continue to be observed in the form of earthquakes, deformation, gas emissions. The unrest has been constant over the past several months and is not accelerating. There are slight variations in sort of the rates of those things. If an eruption were to occur, we think there would be additional signs of unrest. And if this occurred, we would increase our alert level for both aviation and for ground hazards. And we feel that based on 1992 eruption, that would provide days to weeks of additional warning. In terms of hazards, if an eruption were to occur, it would very likely be like those in 1952 and 1993 and 1992 from the Crater Peak vent. In 53, there was one explosive event turned day into night briefly here in the Anchorage, city of Anchorage back in those days. And in 1993, there were 3 events spaced throughout the summer in June, August, and September, although September doesn't really count as summer here in Alaska. The main hazard from a spur eruption would be from ashfall, as well as disruption to aviation from the airborne ash cloud. In 1953, we got about 1/4 of an inch, up to 1/4 of an inch of ash in Anchorage. Very, very fine grained. In 1992, it was about 1/8 of an inch or so, just from one of those events. Notably, 2 of the explosive events in 92 did not result in ashfall just due to winds. We provide at AVO daily situational awareness maps from our ashfall model. It's posted on our website that shows the area, thickness, timing, and likelihood of ashfall should one occur. And if an actual eruption were to occur, we work with our partners with the National Weather Service, the Anchorage Forecast Office, who provide ashfall warnings. That would provide specific information on the areas that would expect to receive ashfall, as well as amounts and timing. As noted, the main hazard is from ashfall. Volcanic ash is not toxic, but it is an air quality concern and can reduce visibility during an ashfall event, and again, cause disruptions to aviation and other sectors. Since February, AVO has been working with our state and local emergency managers, both from Anchorage as well as the Kenai and Mat-Su boroughs, to produce consistent and accurate messaging about the hazards. This has resulted in production of numerous information products about the volcano and recommended practices to mitigate ash hazards and to recover from that. And this really builds on a long-standing partnership with the federal agencies, as well as local and state folks that have been exercised throughout many eruptions over the past decades. My take-home message is for the public to be informed from authoritative sources and not necessarily from YouTube videos that you might see. Be prepared and to not panic. It is not certain that an eruption of Mount Spur will occur, but if it does, ashfall may not occur in populated areas. And if it does occur in populated areas, it will be in certain sectors, depending on the winds. And working with the National Weather Service, there'll be guidance on the impacted areas, amounts, and timing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dave. So Dave covered a lot of what it is that we've been working on for many months with our partners. From there, we have been working locally with community Anchorage members and stakeholders, including the public. We've been talking through what IT, communication impacts, utilities, transportation, public health and medical, and safety and security partners will expect, and what their planned actions are, and any limitations they might have. We also have stood up our regular EOC planning and operations process, and have been conducting a lot of internal and external messaging as well to support all the plans that these teams are working on. We're continuing on working on it, on our plans, inventorying supplies, working through any unmet needs, and all the way through the cleanup operation as well. There are 4 main areas that we're preparing, consistent with our emergency operations plan for the municipality. We're working with leadership from Anchorage Health Department and the Public Works Department and the Office of Emergency Management and a unified command team. For public health, we're working to make sure our MOA staff and other first teams out to help with cleaning up are protected, and also our vulnerable population considerations and safety in that area. For public works and utilities, we're thinking about different tactics and strategies for cleanup, and then as well, lots of communication involved, which is part of why we're here today. And this is perhaps the most important part. As Dave said, how we plan together is with individuals, households, and businesses. I often say they're our biggest group of first responders. So I want to reiterate what Dave said. Do prepare. Go to ready.alaska.gov. Sign up for alerts from the Alaska Volcano Observatory. You can get the information firsthand from them. Follow the National Weather Service at the Anchorage Weather Forecast Office, and follow the Anchorage Office of Emergency Management. We have an alert and warning system that is available to you for all hazards. It's the same one that our partners in Anchorage Police Department use nearly daily to let us know what's going on in the community. And that can be found at muni.org under the Public Safety tab for the Office of Emergency Management. There's instructions there about that. You can also just text the word Anchorage to 67283. Messages for all emergencies will come out from there. Do put together and review your emergency preparedness kits and plans in Alaska. A 2-week supply of food, water, and medication for our family and pets should be available for all hazards. Though the shelter in place in Ashfall will only be a matter of hours, and that timing will be shared from the experts, we are asking for this as an all hazard precaution. We are not expecting disruptions of power or communications at this time. Do question inconsistent reports. Listen to the experts. The Alaska Volcano Observatory has scientists that are world renowned for this work. And so we do need to listen to them. As well, the National Weather Service meteorologists are always standing by to share information related to hazards in the area. Local authorities from the municipality, the boroughs on either side of us, the state and other emergency management authorities will distribute information. Planning for cleanup. Continue regular activities after the ashfall is done. Try to limit movement a little bit immediately afterwards in order not to stir up too much ash. Take precautions if you're at high risk for respiratory illness. Masks, use N95 masks. Use eyeglasses in place of contacts and goggles if you have them, and resume driving, but monitor vehicle filters. Use the least amount of water possible to temper ash clouds, and leave ash on the ground for yards and gardens as we expect that they can handle this amount of expected ash, which is expected to be measured in millimeters. Do not push ash into storm drains. Do not get on your roof. It is dangerous. Consult an expert if you have any concerns. Bottom line is to give kudos to everyone preparing. Preparedness kits and continuity plans are in place. Industry partners are prepared. Shelter in place during the ashfall if possible, and limit movement immediately afterwards as the community cleanup continues. We will adjust as we go because there may be multiple eruptions. Cleanup will take time, and the annoyance of ashfall may persist. Thank you.
Just for the record, Mr. Solt has joined us, Ms. Brawley has joined us, and I believe, Ms. Brawley, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I've seen a lot of the communications going out through many different channels. So clearly people are paying attention and hopefully seeing this information. I have 3 questions. One is just really, again, I've not lived through a volcano eruption. So, and I think a lot of us have not. Should we expect, kind of warning signs like earthquakes in addition to monitoring? That's one. Maybe I will do questions one at a time. I'll try to keep them short.
Yeah, so the earthquakes that are happening at the volcano are not the normal kinds of ground shaking earthquakes that you feel here, from tectonic forces. And so they're related but different. So the volcano will not cause additional damaging earthquakes here in the municipality or elsewhere. And an earthquake that you feel here will not impact the volcano. They're separate.
All right, thank you. And then my other two questions are really about kind of, well, it's just, actually they're different, sorry. Second question is the municipality anticipating any kind of emergency shelter or, like opening up the rec centers or anything like that during the ashfall for folks who don't have otherwise a place to go?
Yeah. Thank you. So we do prepare for those types of shelters on a moment's notice all the time, but we are talking through that very carefully because it's such a short period of time that we are asking folks to shelter in place. It's kind of a different type of shelter than we would normally work towards. But I mean, there's considerations that, where would that go? How would people get there, et cetera? And we have normal partners that we work with on that. And so we have to touch base with all of them. So we're having incident-specific conversations about that as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking, especially if this happens in a nighttime hour where a lot of buildings are normally closed or something like that, just something to think about. And then last question is really, do we have concern at this point about, given all the things happening at the federal level, is there any kind of funding impact to the, in terms of kind of operations that we have locally for monitoring or any of these other kind of responses?
Yeah, that's a tricky question to answer at my in my position. I think that we will be able to weather whatever comes. Based on what we're seeing today. So I think we have the resources that we need at this point to respond effectively, and we have our state and university partners as well that are part of this. So.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Sorry about that. Okay. I don't see any additional questions at this time, so thank you so much. Do you have anything else for us, or is that?
Nope.
Okay, great. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Yep, great. And just a shift in the agenda for folks. We want to make sure that we have a pretty comprehensive report on the alcohol tax coming at the end. So we're going to move a few of these things to next meeting. So the health department, police department, and the fire department are all going to move those updates to next meeting. And so if we can have the Department of Law come up, give a brief update on the APD policy request for proposal, and then we'll move into the main topic for today. So just a quick update on the RFP. Thanks.
Hello, thanks. Eva Gardner, Municipal Attorney. So I am here to provide an update on the APD policy review that the mayor and the chief directed occur last summer. So we have got the RFP out, it closed. We did receive a number of responsive proposals. We are in the scoring process right now. Our evaluation committee does include community members. So our timeline is a little bit more leisurely than perhaps it would normally be to accommodate their schedules. So we are having our second meeting in about 2.5 weeks to discuss scoring, and we hope to come back to the assembly with a recommendation or request for a contract a few weeks after that.
Great. Do you have an anticipated date for when you think you'll be finished with the process and the final selection will be done?
I think it will depend a bit on whether we need more information after we see everyone scores independently under the RFP process and then comes together and reviews the scoring and see if we need additional information or if we have, multiple good contenders and need to follow up with them. So I would say hopefully within no later than a month after our second meeting. So probably about a month and a half out.
Great. And you did say that we received a number of requests. Is that right?
Mhm.
Great. Okay.
And the RFP process is confidential until it comes before you, so I'm limited in what I can say,
I
but
completely understand.
we
Yes.
were pleased to receive
Sure.
responses.
Ms. Brown, do you have a question?
Chair, this is not on this RFP,
Okay.
but it is a law question.
Okay,
Can
go
I
ahead,
ask
yeah.
that? So my question is this, I have had messages from several constituents saying a wildfire was started and the response is we are offering them housing. Someone threatens to shoot a dog, they've been offered housing. And I'm at a loss to what to tell them as far as the consequences if a wildfire is started in a camp. And I was talking with Thea earlier and she said it's like this nexus of there's not a good way to, it's just a citation. And so there's really no consequence that can happen. Can you just explain, is there something that needs to be done to make sure that we can have a meaningful consequence for wildfire?
Sure. Yeah, on fires specifically, that is something that has been on at least my department's radar recently. And so we did just recently do a review of code, and it looks like there are several sections of the civil code that provide for fines and other penalties if you have an open fire in an unauthorized area, if you are burning in park areas where you're not supposed to be. But in terms of criminal enforcement, currently the only options we have under municipal penal code, Title 8, for charging somebody with an offense are one, if the fire actually causes property damage, or if somebody fails to report or fails to take action to stop a significant dangerous fire, put broadly. So we are looking at a potential code change to suggest that would, during periods of heightened fire risk, in the summer when there's a burn ban in effect, that would make it a misdemeanor to have a fire in an unauthorized area. So we are exploring that and sensitive to it to give more, tools to enforce.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Barley.
Thanks. I do have a question on the policy RFP. Can you, because I understand it's still in the procurement process, can you give a rough timeline of when, or if there is anything in the contract that is a hard deadline of the deliverables? Like when would we get the results essentially? Knowing that we're further out from that.
Yeah, so the RFP that we posted did say we would like it to be started and finished within a 6-month timeline. So that's the projected time it would take to complete.
Thanks. Yep, go ahead.
So, and also, because it's a policy review, I know it's hard to say speculatively, but I guess I just want to put on the record a concern that what we will get back is what happened at the state level or others where a lot of items are redacted. And I know that often happens when it's dealing with individual cases or personnel. But I wonder, is there, I guess, just looking ahead, are you anticipating there's going to be things that would potentially not be for public consumption, given that it's a policy review? Thanks.
Sure. I think the goal with this RFP is to have a public product that is not heavily redacted. It is to review, information about how APD does things, not necessarily specifically about individuals doing specific things or individual incidents. And the reason behind that is to ensure that it is able to be public. So we expect to be able to produce an unredacted report. I think to the extent that, perhaps it gets into any confidential APD investigatory policies, which maybe is not particularly likely, we might have to redact those just to protect, APD's ability to keep its investigation techniques to itself. But we don't anticipate redactions along the lines of what you might have seen before.
Thanks. Doesn't look like I have any other questions. Then thank you for being here. Thank you for your update. Okay, so the plan for the remainder of the meeting is to have a pretty comprehensive overview of the alcohol tax report. And so I'm going to hand it over to Thea to do that. We will have some time after that to do a high-level review of the mayor's public safety strategy, but not to go too much in depth. And then for the next meeting, we'll have more time to dig into that in more detail. I also did want to mention that in front of members is a resolution, and I will try to make sure we have a few moments at the end to be able to make sure that folks get an introduction to that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the mayor's office for the update on the alcohol tax 2024. Yep. And just make sure that each person, before you speak, introduce yourself for the record so we know who's speaking.
Okay. Lots happening today. Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm Thea Agnew-Benben. I'm one of the special assistants to the mayor, and I'm here with all these awesome folks from community departments to give you a hopefully not too deadly boring report on expenditures from the alcohol tax. We'll try to keep the slides rolling so that we have time for questions. And we also would just invite you to ask questions as we're going, because we're going to go through all the different departments. So you might want to just ask questions while the person has the floor. So we can go to the next slide. So as you all know, because I think many of you were part of this historic accomplishment, in 2020, Anchorage voters decided to tax alcoholic beverages at a 5% rate. This was a big community effort to get this to pass, and it's been a journey and a real benefit to the community. In that, the measure that the voters voted on, there were 4 uses that were identified. One is related to public safety. It's really focused on first responders. The second one is around addressing child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. The third one is treating substance misuse and promoting mental health. And kind of in that same piece of language was also addressing homelessness. The graphics that you're seeing here are from the strategic plan that was developed, and I'll speak to that in a minute. And during that process, those two uses were kind of separated out for ease of developing goals and measures for those uses. Go to the next slide. So also since 2020, the legislative office has developed this Cheers to You Anchorage website. And for anyone who has any kind of questions about the alcohol tax, you can go to the site. So this is where you'll find, I don't think we have full 2024 up there yet, but we have all the previous years. Yeah, I think the other previous years are up there. You can look at all the expenditures. You can look at how they were grouped by the designated uses. You can read stories. You can look at the strategic plan. So anything related to the alcohol tax is addressed on this Cheers to You Anchorage website. And this was also the brand of a public education campaign. So you might have seen when you're in bars and restaurants that there are coasters, posters, other kinds of things that help educate the public about the alcohol tax. Part of that process was also doing some polling, and in 2024, the polling found that even without being told how the tax was being used, 67% of respondents supported the alcohol tax, and that included 78% of those with a household income of below $60,000 a year, and 73% of people aged 18 to 34. And then when they were informed about how the revenue from the tax is spent, their rate of support went up by 10%. And amongst the different designated uses, addressing child abuse and domestic violence were especially popular and kind of named as the #1 use by most of the people responding. This is the strategic plan right here. The Assembly also developed this kind of shorter version. And this was developed in 2024. It was approved in September. You'll note as we go through the expenditures during this report, even though this is a little bit artificial because those expenditures weren't made, in accordance with this plan, we've gone ahead and kind of identified which goal and strategy in the plan that expenditure most closely links to. Not every expenditure closely linked to this plan, so not everyone has that, but we're trying to show you how you might use this plan going forward. And then the other thing that we've done in this presentation is grouped the expenditures by the designated use. So you'll see those graphics come up during the presentation to kind of identify which use those expenditures are for. So in 2024, you'll see this is a pie chart that's on that Cheers to You Anchorage website. You can see how the 2024 budget allocated the alcohol tax, and also this final report, or this annual report for 2024 is pursuant to AO 2024-126. I'm going to speak for Ona here for a second. One of the things that we would like the body to consider is maybe adjusting the timeframes for this report. Because currently it's due to you at the end of first quarter, which is March 31st, which is really before we have final numbers for 2024. So it might be nice to just adjust this report a little bit later so that we have better accountings that could be provided to you perhaps during the first quarter budget revision. So just something to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, this is too small for you to see, but if you flip to the very end of the slide deck, I made it bigger for you. In 2024, the total budget for alcohol tax funds was $25,433,655, and 90% of that was spent or encumbered. And also I just want to point out that, as you all will remember, yep, there we go, that's bigger. In 2024, we were also using previous year's unspent funds. So 24 million is quite a lot. Sorry, 25 million, quite a lot. The normal amount to be expected from the the tax is around 15 million a year. And then I also just wanted to point out, Kim Rash is sitting next to me, that of that 25 million that was budgeted, 21.7 of that went out through the health department. So that's a massive job and well done. We'll be hearing about that in a minute. Okay, back to the slides. Oops, keep going there. Yep, there. Okay, so these are the departments that received alcohol tax funding in 2024: the health department, the library, municipal attorney, the police department, Parks and Rec, finance, and Anchorage Assembly. And so you're going to hear a brief account from each of those. And Kim Rash's is a little bit longer than the other ones. So I'll hand it over to you.
Kimberly Rash, Anchorage Health Department. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. So this first chart here, just to touch upon it a little bit, it's personnel costs and the operating costs that are dedicated. So we have a grants and contracts administrator, a fiscal supervisor, and then the majority of our housing and homelessness services team comes out of the alcohol tax. We did have some vacancies this past year in 2024, and that is why we were not fully spent. Next slide. So these two, this slide and the slide after is a newer slide that I put into the slide deck. This one really touches upon grantees that have received alcohol tax and in addition, other types of funding that they have received as well. So you can kind of see a more holistic picture. And I know it is tiny, so my apologies on that. But you can really see all the other types of funding that those entities have received in 2024. The next slide after this really shows between 23 and 24 grantees that were awarded and spent their funds in 23, and then those in 2024. Just sort of as a comparison model for you to see. I know in years past that has been the feedback that the health department has received is who has received funds in the prior year, have they spent those funds? And so this diagram really shows 23s awarded and spent, and then 24s awarded and spent. Like Thea had mentioned, there was rollover of funds, which is why the awarded amounts are higher. Next slide. So this is just some grantee feedback that we have received. Every year we try to solicit feedback from our grantees so that not only does it help us, but it also helps really inform the decisions that we make moving forward. So in regards to funding, it's really just about transparency regarding funding changes, improvements to grant execution and payment processes. That is also feedback we have received from the body. So we are continuing to work on that, get those grant agreements out the door a lot quicker. I feel like in 24 and now in 25, we are on a good trajectory and we're doing a great job in getting those grant agreements out the door. Transportation, that is another topic that came up. Assistance with bus passes during the emergency cold weather sheltering season. Also bus passes for legal advocates and case managers. Some feedback in regards to sheltering, just additional warming center space, and then the beds just filling up very quickly. Staffing has been a challenge. This is something that we also saw in 24, is not only within the health department, within that small team, but also with our grantees. They've had staffing issues as well. And so sometimes you'll see throughout this report that they have not spent all of their grant funds, and some of the reasons are due because of their staffing challenges as well.
Actually, I have a question for you, Ms. Brawl, and then Ms. Brumman next.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question about the, it mentioned feedback, assistance with bus passes. That is something that we had put in the funding. So were they saying that this wasn't utilized or it wasn't available? Because I remember that there was money that we put in the budget for that for clients at ECWS. Thanks.
There was some funding, I believe, set aside, and I think it was $200,000 set aside strictly for transportation. This feedback, it was from the this past emergency cold weather sheltering season, so the end of 24. And so those funds weren't available to us. And so just making sure that when we went out to RFP, that we are making sure that the grantees are putting those in their budgets so that there is a line item for that.
Thanks, because I remember that was a huge need, so I'm glad this was called out. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Braga.
When I was on the task force for the strategic plan roadmap, I heard over and over that we need to be putting more investment upstream with the child protection and, homeless youth and people that may be on the verge of homelessness, but we could maybe keep them on the right path. It looks like when I look at the reflection of spending so far, we're not doing that yet. It's much higher on the actual homelessness column. Is there any plans to in some way move more funding to the people who are vulnerable to becoming homeless, that are, I've heard some astronomical number of, if you're a high school student that is in a foster situation, you're more apt to end up on the homeless trajectory, and trying to help people in that area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that, over the years, we have heard that the homelessness category has received the most funding, and trying to balance out the three funding buckets as we have them, because I know that one of the funding streams, which is really in regards to like mental health, substance abuse, receives very little. And so how do we continually try to balance all of our resources out? So I would say that's a continuing effort. I think it takes all of us together trying to think strategically of what resources we have available, what gaps in our continuum are existing, so that we can really be thoughtful in our approach to make sure that we can try to balance those categories out. But in 2024, that homelessness category did receive the most funding.
Through the chair, Member Braga. When Director Rash goes through the expenditures, I think it's important to see that the second category, the one around preventing child abuse and neglect and sexual assault and domestic violence, those are very, by and large, most of them are fairly upstream services. And that is the type of prevention that will, somebody's efforts that help people grow up in stable and safe homes will have a very protective effect in terms of homelessness later in life. So I think even though they are, and that's partly how the strategic plan is set up, it's not set up by each use, because the things that help protect people from the downstream problems that we're trying to avoid are often somewhat common, like housing, employment, education, right? So that's how the strategic plan is set up. And I think I would just encourage you to see those expenditures at the health department as complementary.
Ms. Perrell, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Just because, part of when we discuss these things, it's helpful to continue to reiterate intent. I know there was never a discussion about from the sponsors and really from the advocates who pushed really hard for this to have things kind of evenly split up into thirds. I know that's been said before. And I think the reason for that is it's helpful to be flexible. And also you can make an argument that we should be putting as much as possible into prevention and not simply into public safety or these response kind of things. So I'll just note that, but I'll also note that yeah, from the beginning, there was a lot of work to really push and say, if we want to make a meaningful impact, that we do need to work upstream and not just put funding into emergencies. So I just want to say that very clearly on the record, because I think, as we move further and further away from the tax getting enacted, it's really important to reiterate these things and to hold the line on that essentially. And that's something that my predecessor, Quinn Davidson, did as well. So thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, next slide. So this is all the grantees that received funding under the category of preventing and addressing child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So you can kind of see the layout. It's similar to what I had in 2024, where you see the grantee, you see the amount that was awarded, amount that was spent, if it was not fully spent, the reasons why it was not fully spent, the services they provided, some impacts that were made, and then the new category is linking it back, like Thea had mentioned, to that plan. And so we kind of went through and kind of coded those out. One of the highlights and how I'm going to approach this moving forward is just kind of talk about a few of the highlights so that we can get moving through the presentation because there's a lot of great information. So with this category, I think I just really want to highlight the Alaska Children's Trust. That was a new type of agreement and way that we granted out funds, in which the health department granted directly all the funds to Alaska Children's Trust, ACT, and then they sub-granted out to different entities. And so that was just a different way of doing that type of work. And while, it has its pros and cons for it, overall, it worked out pretty well. One of the pieces of feedback that we did receive is just, again, in regards to insurance. And so really working with our risk manager to try to figure out that piece, because sometimes it is difficult for all grantees to receive the same level of insurance.
I have a question for you. Oh, actually, why don't you go first, Mr. Gonson?
Yeah, just a simple question. This page and the following pages, are these the 23 or 2024 or the combined grants?
2024.
Okay, so it'd be good to label them, but thanks. Helpful info.
And just a clarification in terms of, so that I think I'm following, that that these were expenditures that were made prior to the development of the strategic plan. And so you've gone back and aligned the expenditures with the strategic plan and developed some potential sort of impacts, outcomes, outputs that sort of relate to that. And you may be getting to this later, but are we evolving to a place where we're looking at, kind of what's working and what's not, and making strategic choices in terms of funding that relate to where we're getting the most impact? Is that, would you agree that that's sort of where we're looking at it evolving this eventually?
Yes, and we need to. I think, we need to see what's working really well, what's making the greatest impact, and then seeing if there is continued need moving forward and making sure that those entities or those programming is funded. And so really the great piece with this plan is that we can tie it back and then start to create reports that really focus on those goals and those strategies, so that when we do receive the reportables back out, that there is alignment and that we can show that greater impact.
Right, because I think I brought this up in a previous meeting, that it's good to have a competitive process, but more importantly, I think, is we have a really impactful, right? So figuring out, we may want to continue to fund those that are doing really well and moving forward, and making the different choices on folks that may not be. So that's great. Mr. Rivera, I think, has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's actually a perfect segue to one of the questions that I had. Yeah, I think measuring impact is going to be a critical way for us as Assembly members, both to communicate to the public, but also to consider any future allocations 2026 beyond, right? So I really appreciate that this last column here speaks to the strategy and the specific metric. And there's, by and large, the sort of the two words I see is reduce or increase. And so one of the things that I want to do as the policymaker making these decisions is, okay, so this grant was supposed to reduce X. Prove it. Did it reduce X, right? And it sounds like we're not quite there yet in being able to prove that supposition, but it looks like we're heading towards that. Could you speak to that?
Yes, great question. So I think some of those changes that we're going to see in a community are going to be longer term, are going to be down the road. And so I think if there's consistency in funding, consistency in the work that's being done, then we can track those year after year. I think the hardest part is, some, community members think that maybe we could track like an individual and say, child A was seen here, and then they go through the system throughout the years receiving these, funds and these programming, and then it's made an impact. And so I think what we can do is we can show those little incremental changes at a system level that hopefully that we could see over time through reporting. I know that, in 22, the reporting was a little different than what we saw in 23. And so I think that with this, from 23 now to 24, we can really start to see and drill down a little bit better than what we have been doing in the past.
Great, thank you.
All right, next slide. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry. All great, entities programming. All right. So the next couple of slides, there's a lot of slides actually, preventing and addressing homelessness. So this right here is just an overall capture of all of the grantees that received funding. So right here, you can see what was awarded and what was spent. Overall, I would say that a lot of the funding was spent. There was only a few that were underspent in 2024. Next slide. And so really here is just, again, a bunch of great entities doing a lot of great work. Right here, call out to the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. The Next Step program is in here. One of the items that you saw in February of this year rolled over some of the funds that were not spent. So you see in that category in the white box what was not spent. So those funds rolled over into 2025. Next slide. All of these are just really providing those critical services for sheltering, either the operations, the food service, case management. There is some emergency sheltering in here. The mobile case management was something that came up in 23, I want to say, through the Behavioral Health Task Force. And so in 2024, the health department went through a competitive process. Catholic Social Services Mobile Case Management was awarded funds and then had those impacts there. Next slide, just again, either the locations are either at non-congregate and or the congregate shelter on East 56th Avenue. Next slide. Again, you'll see the highlight of In Our Backyard. So again, those funds were not fully spent. So in 2025, again, in February, you saw those funds roll over so they can continue that great work that they're doing over there. Yes.
Oh, looks like I got a couple. Why don't we go with Mr. Littlefield first, and then we'll go to Ms. Ponga.
When you said that unspent funds roll over, do they roll over to the entity that they were originally intended for, and they just keep in that bucket, so to speak?
They rolled over for the original intent and purpose of those funds. So when they were not spent, technically they would roll over into what's, I guess, called fund balance.
Okay.
But they were rolled into the new year of 2025 and granted to those entities for that same purpose.
So it goes back into fund balance and they get re-awarded in 2025.
That is my understanding. Yes. I don't know, I'm not familiar with OMB's terminology, but I'm pretty sure it rolls into fund balance, and then fund balance it rolls into when we award it back out.
Thank you.
Ms. Ponga.
Thank you. On the same page that In Our Backyard is on top, I'm sorry, there's no page number, but most of these organizations I've heard of, but I've never heard of Spins, Polo, La Brasa.
They provided food in the beginning of 2024 for emergency cold weather sheltering.
Thanks. Yes, Mr. Constant.
Obviously.
Yeah, the conversation about funds rolling over, I think that we might want to think through a little bit and hear your theory on what happens with the Children's Trust Major Grant at the end of the year. I don't know that we intend that they would then be able to re-grant those funds. Maybe or maybe not, but I think that because it's such a substantial pool of funds, and if there is a fund balance, I think we should spend some time thinking about how we approach year end with that kind of funding.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, I was just going to share. I remember that was basically a reappropriation for a 1 year of what would have been otherwise those grants that the muni does. So I don't think it's in the 2025 budget. I think it's already been done.
Right, and I don't, but we just appropriated those funds, and I am certain that it's gonna work out great, and we're gonna wanna do it again. But I think there are some mechanics to think through about how that might work, because they are acting as an agent of us, and so different than a grantee per se, right? I think if it does come back before us in any way, we should really think about the process, how we would annualize that and structure it so that it's fair.
Yep, that's it, and just that relationship in terms of the re-grantor and how that works in terms of funds. So, do you want to address that at all, or?
Other than to say, I think it's a good idea that we really need to make sure that anyone that is receiving funds, it's equitable. Everyone has the availability to either apply or receive funding. So, yeah.
Yes, but Ms. Brawley, I think, has one more question.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, my personal intent would not necessarily be that we do that again. I think it was an interesting experiment, but I will note in the ACE fund, we just approved $2.4 million going to, I think that was the number total, to Thread. And so there's another opportunity to look at how those are used. And again, the questions about access and who can apply for those. Thanks.
And just noting again, that part plus after the internal part of managing what happens at the end of the year and how do we flow through that process? Because I could imagine that becomes baked in so deep that we would never see it. And I don't know that that's wise. I think we should have some special insight into those relationships.
Yeah, I think that's an important question or conversation to have. Go ahead.
Great. If we can keep on going through the slides. This is just all the entities that were under what's called the unified funding. So that happened in 23. And so in 24, those are the entities that received their funding. So you can see what was awarded and spent, 100% across the board. The next slide shows that breakout, and then it shows out the additional breakout in the Q1 budget revision process for 2024. And then, yep. So this is just our continued commitments. So the Housing and Homelessness Services team is committed to continuing to have transparency with alcohol tax spending for our community. 2020 initiative of providing more professional services in collaboration with community partners to provide that service-rich environment. And so we updated our way of having the memorandum of agreement. We created a short form, one pager that a entity can fill out. And then we can document that and then move that through the process of getting them an MOA. And then additionally, regularly meeting with the grantees and contractors and third-party oversight. That's been one of the greatest things that we've seen recently, really just that collaborative environment, everyone coming together, having conversations, having regular touch bases and meetings has been super helpful. And then just becoming more visible in the community. So the staff within the Housing and Homelessness Services are visiting all shelters, non-congregate and congregate shelters throughout the week. They spend some time at the shelters and really just putting eyes on the ground and working with those contractors. And that is all I have.
Thanks, Director Ash. I am going to present for the library and the municipal attorney, but I believe Director Harrison might be on the line in case we have questions for her. We can go to the next slide. So the expenditures that were budgeted for the library are within the second designated use of child abuse prevention, sexual assault, domestic violence. The first one was an early literacy award. There was 114,000 budgeted and about 84,000 spent. This was to increase early literacy opportunities at the library. Next slide. There was also an award to Best Beginnings. This is another early literacy project. 250,000 was budgeted, and the intention here was that it would last 3 years. And so each child that was enrolled would be able to get 3 years of service through that. So that's partly why you only see a third of that spent. And then the last one was the community readiness coordinators. And I know there was some complication with this one between the library and the health department. So if there's questions about that, Dr. Ash can speak to that. So this was budgeted at 347,000 and about 92,000 of that was spent.
Yes.
Sure, yeah. Can you dig a little bit of what that label is that you just said? I think it's the first time I've heard that label.
Yeah, so those are the positions that were in the library that then moved to the health department. And so those were originally the social caseworkers in the library. Then when they came to the health department, I want to say in 22, end of 22, they were renamed as community resource coordinators. And so those positions are no longer with the health department. Those positions are back with the library.
So what's the functional difference between a case manager and a community resource coordinator? I think we funded it as case management, and so
Mhm.
I just am curious what the functional difference is.
Yeah, so the way that these PDs were written for this coordinator role was to be really outreach workers. And so that is the work that they completed in 2024, working in the encampments, working to get supplies out to the unsheltered population, which is different than the intent from those when they were at the library.
Yeah, I think I wanted to just, maybe just for the sake of those listening, under the category of preventing and addressing child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, the third one here, is this specifically around working with children in some way, or can you explain what?
That's a mistake. Sorry. I should have popped in that other slide. Yeah, the third one really should have been around homelessness.
Okay, good.
Yeah, sorry about
That makes
that.
a little
Yes.
more sense. Okay,
That's my
that's what I was confused. Okay, that makes more sense that it fits under that category. Yes.
So I'm gonna come back to that slide, and so this is what it was in 2024. And so what you're reporting to us now is that after this work, they're now back in the library.
The positions were vacated in 2024, so the actual positions, the empty positions are now back with the library, yes.
And then this report shows kind of encampment work and other work. This isn't what's going forward. This is what went past.
Correct, yep,
So this will be shifting towards the supportive functions that the library needs.
yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Thanks for that clarification. Okay.
We can go ahead a couple slides. Yeah, just to be clear, this report is the annual report from 2024. So everything we're talking about in this is just 2024. Okay, next slide, please. So the municipal attorney's office received, we go for it? Yeah, great. Alcohol tax funds to support 2 employees, so a prosecutor and a clerk. 287,000 was budgeted. You can go to the next slide. And 219 of that was spent just because of partial year vacancies. Okay, hand it over to Chief Case.
Go for it.
All right, next slide, please. I have 2 buckets of money, if you will, from 2024. One of them was for funding of 3 positions, and then one of them funded training, specifically in service training for our continuing education for our officers. And the 3 positions that are funded are a tech that does fingerprint analysis, a dispatcher, and a crime analyst. And so, believe it or not, even in modern technology, we still have a human being that looks at fingerprints and analyzes them. Our criminal intel unit with our analysts, we have a tremendous amount of data that comes into the police department, and as this body knows, asks a lot of questions, as well as the public, and getting access to that information so that it's consumable to be able to analyze the work that we're doing and whether or not it's effective has been very challenging. So increasing that has helped in moving forward, then obviously adding an extra dispatcher to reduce that 911 call time. And then our training for in-service training, really what this has allowed us to do is be extremely agile in terms of when things come up, when we have, incidents that don't go the way we'd like, or the way the public doesn't like, or we have new things that the assembly would like to look at our response or an administration. The ability to train our entire staff and come up with the funding to do that is very difficult without having it specifically funded. So this money over the last 3 years, and particularly in 2024, was used to immediately adapt our in-service training to meet the needs of kind of an ever-changing landscape.
I have a question just in terms of the format. The process you were using before in terms of aligning it to the strategic plan, what's the thinking here as it relates to a goal, strategic plan, where it aligns in some way? Is there a thought about how to do a similar format in terms of being able to assess the impact of the funds and connecting it to some sort of goal and metric?
I think, these funds were appropriated before the plan was made. And so fitting these categories into the current strategic plan became a little bit challenging and difficult. I can say that moving forward, our training money is moved over to the operating budget, so that won't be alcohol tax money. And so continue to move forward. It's the 3 positions that'll be funded.
I can just add briefly to that. Part of what we'll be sharing at the end of this meeting and at the next meeting, the public safety strategy, will have metrics that are more closely linked to like this type of activity.
Thanks. Thanks. Great. Okay. I don't see any other questions on that one. Thanks.
Hi, Shanna Gamble, Parks and Rec. Next slide, please. So the alcohol tax supports our Healthy Spaces division, which provides year-round cleaning. Our budget for '24 was $639,000, and we did spend 95% of that. So next slide, please. Here's just a breakdown from labor and non-labor. Most of our budget is with the labor, and our non-labor is relatively small, and you can see 75% of that covers our fleet and fuel. So Parks and Rec department has to cover the other funds. Next slide. Our matrix. These are a couple things that we measure. So last year they cleaned 262 sites and then threw away 646 tons of trash, or 107 elephants. That's all I got. And it aligns with the goal 5 for the strategic plan.
Yes, Ms. Bronco.
I don't see on the list of, on the pie chart, unless I'm missing it. So there's fuel and fleet. What's the dumping charge? Does solid waste services, are we
We dump
charged
for
for?
free.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think that how does this compare? Well, one of the things that I'm curious about is what we did before the alcohol tax, right? And so, and how this has changed our ability to do this work. And maybe in this case, have these funds allowed us to do more? Has this allowed us to do it differently? Talk to us a little bit about how your work in terms of this kind of cleanup has changed because now we have the alcohol tax.
So it has provided us with 6 full-time positions that we have not had in the past.
Okay.
So increase there. And then we have 3 additional winter seasonals that support the whole year-round process. So I think it's increased. We definitely could use more. There's more need for sure, but it is take that more.
Yeah, I'm curious about it because I think that one of the things that I think that the public is really looking for is, now that we've done this, what's changed, and what are the impacts? And I think being able to, this is a very tangible example of being able to say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we were only picking up this much trash, or we were only doing this much, and being able to demonstrate that our city is cleaner and our city is being, such sort of things. So that's what I'm looking for, is to be able to, and then over time, I would hope that we would be able to see that.
So the metrics are on the PVR
Okay.
for the past years, the last 2 years, 3 years. So there is some history.
Okay, so there is some data there that we would look at. Okay, great. Mr. Constant.
I just have to push back a little bit on this idea that you dump for free. It's paid for essentially by the ratepayers of the solid waste service utility. And so we probably should be accounting for the IGC, or the cost differential of what this costs to dump, so that we can understand, and if those costs are spread across both the collection utility and the actual tipping side, that's not fair to the folks who are in the collection utility, because they're a part of a very narrow bandwidth of ratepayers. The actual landfill has a broader payer base because people who dump there pay for it. And so it would be wise, I think, to understand how that's paid for. And I'm not suggesting we don't do that. Believe me, I support us doing that, but we should earnestly account for who pays.
Note taken.
Thanks. And I guess I want to put a finer point on this. I think that I'm hearing that, or I'm seeing personally, and also hearing just a lot of concern around our city in terms of trash, right? Not just related to the encampments and that sort of thing, but just in general. And so one of the things that this makes me really curious about is what's possible, right? What's possible if we invested more, and how we could actually do a better job as a city of cleaning ourselves, and that's something that we could visually see each year and be like, wow, it looks a lot cleaner than it did last year, or wow, I'm really noticing a difference. And so I'm curious about your comment about if we had more, and so that's something maybe it's one where we can dig into is talking about what does a city of our size, of our type, require as it relates to cleaning, and other cities of our size, what kind of a fleet of vehicles and people and that sort of thing they use to be able to make sure that we're doing the right job with that. So that we could set that aside, but I'd really love to dig into that at some point. So yes, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, on that point, I'm going to say something that I was planning to say at the end, which is I believe long-term we should be moving Healthy Spaces funding out of this funding, not because it's not important, but it's not a homelessness service. It is a response to homelessness, but it is park cleaning. And so that's where I'm at. So I'm interested long-term in what that looks like. We've operationalized the mobile crisis team, the safety patrol. We've operationalized fully multiple things after using alcohol tax funds. And so I think that's something that I want to continue exploring, and I will keep bringing up for next year's budget. But in the meantime, I think it's also really important to remember that this funding basically allowed for park cleanup after camp abatement outside of summer months. That's what it's for. That is why there's an increase. That's why there's full-time funding. It was a seasonal activity, and there's still some money in our general budget that does that. We also have a tax cap. And so I think the other thing on the point of cleanup, that is something to talk about another time, but I think we need to go back to the community at large. We have a citywide cleanup that the Chamber of Commerce has done for many years, which is awesome. How do we get more people to do that? How do we get more businesses to directly put funding into that? Because our city is too large and too spread out for the city to pay for it. And over, people have said we don't want to pay more. And we have a tax cap anyway that controls what we can spend on operations. So I think it is a conversation, but I would want to firmly take it out of alcohol tax altogether, or at least not pursue any increases in the alcohol tax, because I think it's a much bigger community conversation and how all public sector, private sector take ownership of this city. And so it is a conversation, but I just want to strongly say we should not be looking at alcohol tax for more park cleanup at this point, is my personal view. Thanks.
Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I think I was leaning that way as well, but with a different kind of target. I think that we ought to consider looking at solid waste service to become the entity that funds this service. Why? Because it is a management of solid waste. It is within their mission, and they're a ratepayer-based service. And we probably could apply some form of user fee at the landfill that is paid every time somebody tips, that could actually fund this outside of the cap. And so then we could actually have the professionals who are organized to manage trash do this work, and we probably could come up with a more efficient approach, because it's not our parks people trying to be trash management people. Instead, it's trash management people who are funded to do that work in pros. And so I think that Ms. Brawley is on the right track, and there is a natural here, and we should look that way.
Thanks. And I'm noting time. We want to probably move forward. Go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, real quick. We do spend some money for administration, collection, and auditing through our finance department. Total cost for that is $309,682. And now I'm going to move it over to Claire Ross to speak to a couple slides around the assembly.
Thank you, Claire Ross, Anchorage Assembly. The Legislative Services team got funding for 2 projects in 2024. We've been doing in 2021, after the first year of the alcohol tax, some assembly members thought, we're doing this whole new thing. We need to educate the community on what we're doing and make sure for transparency and accountability that members of the public know how the money is being spent. So they gave the Legislative Services Office $50,000, and that's a year for a campaign, and that's been repeated since. relatively small amount of money to do a big education campaign. So we started by talking to bar owners or restaurant owners, licensees, just to learn what their concerns were, what they knew about it. And so we really started the campaign with educating at the front lines with the staff and the owners of licenses. And so that is how you saw the Cheers campaign with the posters and the coasters in many places. And then this last year, we used a lot of that money to send it to we communicated, I think, with just about every license holder to get them involved in the campaign and answer their questions. So then they could then answer questions to the public. And then also this past year, getting that Cheers Anchorage website up so that there's a place, a one-stop shop where you can go and get all the information. And I've been waiting for this report to come out, but we'll be updating that for the 2025 season soon to include this report. And then the second one was a one-time thing new to, I believe we started it in 2023 and wrapped up in 24, and you were all very much a part of that process to come up with this strategic plan. I might maybe move a slide. I think I have a little bit, so go to the next slide. As you already know, the reason for the plan was to have a vision, mission, and values and make sure there was alignment on and thought put behind spending instead of what was randomly needed in the fall before the next year. And I think one of the biggest things to come out of that was that short plan that Thea held up at the beginning of this meeting. So I encourage the members that are going to be moving forward this next year to schedule some time to take that up, perhaps in July before the administration puts together their alcohol tax budget so that the assembly can review this report, what you talk about, some of the things you've talked about today and what things you want to move forward and what things you want to stop next year and be able to give that information to the administration before July, mid-July, when they're starting to put their budget together. And then the one other thing that came out of that plan specific to the assembly was getting this report done. So it's very exciting to see it done and have a report that spurred a lot of great conversation for you so that you could take a little more ownership in planning in future years alcohol tax.
Thanks. Ms. Brawley and then Ms. Bronga.
Yeah, thanks. First, I'll just note with the communications work, it's funny because originally that was in the mayor's office budget a few years ago. And then in order to make sure that it moved forward, it was moved to the assembly. So people ask kind of why are certain things in our budget? So that's the answer why for that one. And also, I think it is one of the biggest questions we've gotten since this tax has passed is what is the money being spent on? And I think it's really important. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done as a communications, or I should say, the communications team, because in order to have these revenue conversations, we have to demonstrate how we're using those funds. So I think it's really good. And it's hard to get people to look at it because it's so dense. And so I really appreciate all the work that's being done to make it more accessible. My question is actually for the mayor's office kind of going forward for the 2026 budget. I know it's early. We know kind of the broad intent to work upstream and all those things. And I was just looking back to our 2025 budget, we increased the spend on homelessness because we have such a need, but we continue to have this tension between that priority and every other priority, right? So I'm just wondering kind of, as we look at this, and as we are in a world where we don't really have fund balance anymore because we're fully getting things out the door, what does that look like? Or is there any preview kind of how you guys are thinking about the budget going forward and especially going into 2026? Thanks.
Believe it or not, we have been working on 2026 budget stuff already. And I think the short answer is with the strategies that the mayor's developed, those tie to a lot of what you also see in the alcohol tax strategic plan. And so both in terms of the metrics that we want to be tracking and reporting out to you and how we're allocating funding, we want them to be in line with those documents and those kind of both community supported and kind of best practice approaches. So I think that's like the most information I can give at this point.
Ms. Bronga, you had a question?
Claire, I want to thank you for all of your work on that alcohol tax strategic plan and the messaging. But I wanted to ask a question to Parks and Rec. So one thing Member Brawley brought up was, getting some more volunteerism for this cleanup. And I regularly am asked from neighbors, could we go and clean up that camp? And then I reach out to Healthy Spaces and they're like, no, don't have them go in there. It's not safe. So there is this safety because there are needles and other things in the parks. But there are people who are willing to do it. It's just right now we've been saying no. The other thing is the cost of the dumpsters. In particular, near Centennial Park, the neighbors have noticed that someone who's moving out of an apartment in the area who doesn't want to pay for trash service or pay for dumping will dump their couch in that dumpster. So some of those, we would personally would like to have the Centennial Park one removed. It feels like it just encourages people to camp there, but mostly it's encouraging people who don't want to pay for dumping to quickly get rid of something they want to get rid of. So we might need to look at some of those dumpster locations.
Mr. Compton.
Yeah, Mayor LaFrance, when she was on the assembly and I participated in one of these quote community camp cleanups at Third Avenue, and it was an absolute disaster. And it should never happen again, in which members of the community are organized in a faction that would go in and remove property from a camp, because it turns into a nightmare very quickly. And that's all I can say is I think the mayor would reflect on that moment as a dire and awful experience, and people with the best intentions did not come across with the best intentions.
Thanks.
Can I briefly speak?
Sure, go ahead.
To the chair, member Constant and member Braga. We did just speak about this on Tuesday, actually, about how we could, in a safe and respectful way, have members of the community help. And I think where we haven't kind of completed the conversation, but I think where we got to is Healthy Spaces can go in and do kind of the main work, which is removing structures, taking care of hazardous materials, and any sharps and those kinds of things. And then there may very well be a role for community members to come in after that, once there's no campers there and the main work has happened, to kind of, we absolutely want community members reactivating spaces. So doing cleanups, doing other types of activities there, we 100% want. So I don't want you to think that your comments went on deaf ears, because we actually just had a conversation about it with Parks and everybody else. So we will find a way to do that.
Thanks. And just and add that, thanks, Claire, for your work on this as well, and your team. And I just want to really reemphasize that the communication around this and the sort of alignment to goals and metrics, I think, is going to be more and more important. And as this plan evolves, we really need to be communicating really clearly what we're doing and how we're doing it and what the impacts are in a really succinct way. So I want to make sure that we're, whether it's through our or through the mayor, the mayor's department, that this work in terms of communication around this can continue. So just appreciate that. Yeah.
I'll make one more comment. This is going to be our last year of the assembly doing this work. We're trying to pass everything off to the administration. And so that will be something to keep an eye on, to make sure, if you want to keep that going, to make sure it gets put in the budget and that there's someone in the administration to do it.
Okay. Thanks.
I think that's been the one hard part about doing this in the past, and why the assembly did so much, is because the alcohol tax, a lot of it is put on the health department because they get such a big chunk of it. But as you can see, there's so many departments that work on the alcohol tax that it's hard to find one person who can be the point for making all these decisions and doing things. And so now with the new administration, with Thea, I think we have more of that one point to go to.
Great. I think that concludes the update on the report. Okay, great. Do you want to move over to give a high level update on the strategic plan? Just a brief one.
Public safety strategy.
Yes.
Yep.
The public safety strategy.
Yes.
Strategic public safety strategy.
If there's time, because I know.
Yeah. If you could just give a brief sort of where it's at, and then we'll go more in depth in the next.
And do members all have printed
I
copies?
think we got this thing.
Okay, great.
Small version.
So we are very happy to now have a public version of this. Should we hand these around?
Yeah, I think she has some as well.
Okay, do you want a bigger copy? Or folks in the audience might want more too.
Thanks.
Great, thanks so much, Liza. Great, okay, and we have it on screen as well. So I'm just gonna briefly share a little bit about this and the goals, and then identify for you some point people for each goal in case you have questions or want to have conversation between now and the next committee meeting. And at the next committee meeting, we'll take probably like 45 minutes to an hour, if that's okay, to kind of give you a robust presentation about what is included in each of these goals. So I guess the first thing I want to make sure is clear is that just like the other strategies that the mayor's put forward, these are real team efforts. We see public safety as a combined effort of multiple municipal departments. And I know that it's really common to just sort of look at APD and say that's what public safety is, but we've really designed this strategy to draw on the strength and expertise of numerous departments. Brad, do you want to come sit up here? And then Shanna, you could be up here too, if you want. No? Okay. Just as an example, we see parks as part of this. We see transportation as part of this, health department, fire department, of course, the police department. So that's the main emphasis that we'd like to make. Our 4 goals, and you'll see this you can move to the middle of the next part. Thank you. Is first, a robust public safety workforce. We've made great strides at the health department to fill vacant positions. Those are really important positions for this strategy. Chief Case, I think you've got some, do you want to just share a snippet of like your most recent update on that?
In terms of filling vacant positions here, probably in the next 30 days, we'll talk about the next academy that's coming up. We're kind of closing out the selection process. It looks like we'll have our first full academy in over 5 years. And then also, I've been talking about creating more of our professional staff positions at the police department, and we are coming to the conclusion of that process where we're looking at hiring 19 community service officers.
Oh, that's great. Good news.
And then, of course, the fire department's also a key part of our public safety workforce, and there are also strategies and the different challenges the different departments face are different, but they're all ones that we're aware of and want to work on, as well as not just building the workforce, but also making sure that training and professional development and a lot of cross-training can happen. We want to build a really collaborative workforce. So that's that first goal. We also have, of course, we want to continue to fill and train all of our prosecutor positions. And we've also made great progress there. So that's good news. Second goal is that we have less crime and more accountability. So we have a real focus here on some of the crimes that we experience at much higher rates. We want to really reduce the recurrence of domestic violence and sexual assault. We have efforts underway to start piloting programs around violence interruption in some of the communities that experience higher rates of gun violence. As you've heard with most of our strategies, we have a strong focus on behavioral health. We want to make sure that people, no matter where they come up against our services, whether that's safety patrol, whether that's in a shelter, whether that's an interaction with a patrol officer, an interaction with EMS, that they, if they need it, can get access to behavioral health care. So that's a big goal, but that's something we're really committed to. We also know that businesses are experiencing a lot of retail theft and other kinds of vandalism. That's happening in downtown, midtown, other parts of the community. So that's something we're also really working on. Our third goal, and again, it's something the Assembly's really invested in over many years, and we are 100% engaged in making sure that people have access to crisis care when they need it. We've got a lot of great pieces in place. We're really working on coordinating those and making sure that we get the right response to each person when they need it. And then, as people, Member Branga and others were describing earlier around the importance of prevention, we see the health department as a really important piece of that. Part of hiring up folks at the health department means we have access to care for more people at the clinic, but that we're also able to do more harm reduction and outreach and public education. And then our fourth goal is that we make sure that our roads, parks, and trails are safe for everyone, whether that's day to day and also during emergencies. So we've included some of the work that Brad and folks at Transportation are working on to reduce pedestrian deaths, and which we know is a huge issue. We want to make sure that reckless driving is addressed, that street safety through lighting, and speed limits are addressed. We, of course, are also working with fire and the Office of Emergency Management to make sure our wildlife risks are addressed. You might have noticed if you went to muni.org this week that we have high fire danger. One of the things that the mayor's made happen is the woodlot that SWS manages is going to be free. So anybody who's got wood on their property, or you've got dead trees, whatever, you'll be able to deliver that for free, which we encourage everyone to do, and to make sure that your property is fire-wise. And then, of course, we also have our emergency management efforts going on, which you heard a little bit from Amanda already today. And then our healthy spaces work and work to revitalize public spaces and trails and parks is another priority. So that's a quickie overview. I also wanted to just identify, kind of point people for you. So for goal 1, if you have questions kind of between now and our next meeting, we'd like you to go to Director Rash for that one. For goal 2, we'd like you to go to Chief Case. For goal 3, that would be Chief Schragi or Assistant Chief Parch. And goal 4, Brad Coy. And of course, you can always contact me for whatever, if you want to talk.
Thanks. And as noted, we'll go through this more in depth at our next meeting. So I appreciate that. I do want to just ask a question. How many people in the audience are interested in testifying? Are there folks out there? I want to make sure that there's time. By raise of hands. Doesn't look like there is anybody there. Okay, well, wonderful. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for both of those robust presentations. Appreciate the time. I want to make sure we have a few minutes to talk about this resolution that is in front of us, and then we'll close out our meeting. Member Brawley or Member Rivera, would you like to just quickly introduce this to the body?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a draft resolution which continues a years-long conversation that we have had as a body regarding the Public Safety Advisory Commission, and in particular, and more broadly than just that commission, how the public engages with public safety. So this is a resolution that members Presvidia, Brawley, and myself have been working on for some time now, and hope to bring it on. You'll see it on the addendum, so this Friday for the April 8th agenda. And essentially what this does is it lays out the process for truly exploring and diving deep into that work in a very collaborative and community-minded approach through the creation of a task force. You all know me, you all know that I love a good task force, and I also know how to run these task forces very well and produce good results with them. And so that is, as the main author of this resolution, that was my intent in creating and penning this, is to create a framework that should provide, I think, some good results for us as we continue doing the work. I won't read this for you. I'll let you all read it yourself. Just know that this will be on the addendum. Goal is about 6 months or so of work with a final report to the Assembly on October 21st, and then at which point it's in our hands on how to move forward. Thanks.
Member Brawley, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just briefly add, just to acknowledge that there was a budget amendment that was discussed back in the fall. This is not the exact same thing as that, so I hope folks would be open to this and not just kind of call back to that prior conversation. Just want to say that out loud. And then, I appreciate Mr. Rivera laid out kind of our intent. And also, I think the real intent with this is to bring the community fully into that conversation, right? And not just drive and say, here's the outcome that we're expecting, but to genuinely have that conversation, and also work with police, the police union, all the folks who want to be at the table. So just to say that is the intent very clearly, and we look forward to having that conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, I think I don't have any real issues with this, but I will say, the Assembly, I think, made a decision not to approve moving forward with the creation of an oversight committee. for the police department. And so I just want to say that here and now, that still for me is a principle. Even if I get to a yes vote on this, it is not with the intent to establish a police oversight or review board. And so I just want to put that out there.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. Any other questions on this item? All right. Looking at our agenda, I think we've gotten through it. Is there anyone who would like to testify at this time for audience participation? Do we have anybody on the phone? No. Okay. Any other items for members before we close? Seeing none, thank you all for being here today. Thanks for the discussion. This meeting is adjourned.